The narrative role of Avowed's companions confuse me. None of them are romanceable, so they're not included to enhance role-playing, and only 2 of them have companion quests, so they're not included to tell a story. They do all have a major impact on the main narrative, but afterwards they fade into the background, possibly never to be heard from again if the player keeps them locked away in camp. But as I spoke to them in camp, something stood out to me about this group of characters. They all hated me because of my choices. Even the Baldur's Gate 3 crew didn't talk back to me as much as my party in Avowed did. I've only done one playthrough, but every single pivotal decision I made had a split opinion from my party members, where 2 of them think I did the right thing, and the other 2 curse my name for my choice. The companions are there to call you out on your choices, and make you feel either justified or mortified for your actions in the living lands. But this got me thinking, to what end? There's no romance option or relationship mechanic, so it's not like there's any consequences to winning or losing their approval, and the only way you can get your party to abandon you is if you betray them before the final level of the game. But the diverse backgrounds and personality of the companions allow for a broad range of perspective and lets them all naturally point out the contradictions that the player makes when deciding the outcome of the living lands. However, this diversity in background is all tied together by the core themes of Avowed's main story, which explores colonialism, cultural survival, and inequality, and each of their opinions is reflected in these perspectives. Kai represents a pragmatic, militaristic perspective, often dealing with conundrums in simple, straightforward methods. However, unlike most archetypes, he doesn't have the goal of completing his mission as his primary deciding factor. Usually, he defaults to what would save the most lives or make people's lives easier. This means he's always the good cop in every situation. But that doesn't necessarily always make him right, because Obsidian writes situations that can't be solved without some nuanced thought. It's not as simple as do what the good character says, because there are still major consequences to Kai's choices, just not ones that become immediately apparent. His military background ties into the main theme by weighing the values of colonial powers and local inhabitants, because he's not used to deep thought, just taking orders, and the simplest option is the one that's the most appealing. In the game, this is reflected as him preferring the practical choices over the idealistic ones. Giatta's philosophy is almost the polar opposite of Kai's. She's nothing but nuance and idealism. While the rest of the team agrees that destroying the Dream Scourge is the right thing to do, Giatta argues that it should be understood in order to further enhance animancy to save more lives. Her enlightened nature as a skilled animancer means she's used to looking at complex problems from all possible angles in order to solve them, but oftentimes this leads to overthinking problems that have an obvious solution. This is reflected in her desire to understand the Dream Scourge, which has been nothing but a negative for the living lands, with no evidence that it could be used to help someone. But Giatta's idealism and thirst for scientific advancement means she doesn't look at something she doesn't understand as dangerous, but a potential avenue for furthering her studies. However, this can lead to her overlooking the human cost of her animancy, like when you're forced to choose between saving lives in Thirdborn or saving the ruins. Giatta doesn't consider the human cost, because she's only looking at the potential good rather than the practical bad. Marius is a pragmatist like Kai, but he doesn't consider the greater good in his decision-making. He looks at the individual good. This comes from his isolation and lack of experience in considering others when making a choice. To use a BioWare term, this would make him the renegade to Kai's paragon. He's also Giatta's polar opposite, as he's almost incapable of thinking about the future and exclusively focuses on the immediate short-term gains. His discomfort with civilization heavily influences his choices, and oftentimes is unrepresentative of anyone else but him and the envoy. This can actually make his choices appealing to players who aren't engaged or connected with the world and characters, and are looking for the most gratifying experience while playing the game. Personally, I think his opinions are the most useless, but Avowed is all about getting the broadest possible range out of a minuscule cast. Finally, Yatzli just wants to watch the world suffocate in Andra's titties. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, Yatzli's ecstatic and scattered thoughts often lead her to having contrarian opinions to what would be considered conventional reasoning. This comes from her study of the godless, which are a people with no alignment whatsoever, leading her to adopt their wildly inconsistent reasoning in defiance of structural normalities. Now, I'm not saying she's a deliberately difficult character in terms of persuasion, she just seems to have the most malleable philosophy of the party and can be made to side with whatever opinion Obsidian wants. So she's a mix of Marius's individualism and Giatta's insatiable curiosity, while her eclectic personality allows her to also have opinions that don't align with what's typical. But you can guarantee that she'll never agree with the Steel Garrote or Adern on anything. The companions in Avowed aren't there for typical party member reasons. They're not journeying with you to support you, they're present to criticize your every choice and make sure you understand the impact of your decisions from every angle. Hell, it's a miracle that they all didn't kill each other on the first day with how varied their outlooks on life are. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video on what I think the biggest problems with Bethesda's writing is.